Now, before we start talking about the 5-stage hype cycle, a word briefly about hype. To me, anyway, hype has a negative connotation. For example, the Motley Fool started. I know some of you were with us back in the day, launching on AOL in 1994, and we were really critical of people who, quote, hyped, end quote, stocks. And we don't like that. We don't like hyping stocks because to us, it signals usually, if it's a systemic thing, kind of a pump and dump approach. And certainly back in the early days of the internet, it turns out even still today on the internet, you see among especially micro cap stocks, people who are hyping them. And in general, we don't like hype. But at least in Gartner's parlance, and what we're talking about this week, hype is just a thing. It is when a lot of awareness is built up about something and the consequences of that in the stock market. And that's what we're going to talk about this week. But I just want to make sure you understand that hype is a balanced word. And in fact, I'm going to say a word here in favor of hype for a sec. So who is the most, if you're a basketball fan, who's the most hyped professional basketball player of our time? And I have to admit, I don't watch much National Basketball Association NBA basketball, but I'm pretty sure it's LeBron James. I might ask at the same time, who is the greatest basketball player of our time? And while I'm not a huge student of the game, I think a lot of people would say that LeBron James is, if not the best, certainly one of the very best, one of the top basketball players of our time. In my experience, often hype is built up appropriately. The big hyped singer on The Voice or American Idol, or what's the most hyped social media platform you can think of today, Facebook. Often, this is kind of related to merit. Often the things that are the best get a lot of acclaim. Not always. There's some hidden gems out there, but I want you to understand that hype, to me, is often justified, and in the case of what we'll be talking about this week, you'll see why. All right, enough about hype. Let's go to the 5 phases of progression of the hype cycle. So, number 1, every hype cycle is touched off by the technology trigger. That's what Gartner Research calls it. I'm using their terms for this podcast, technology trigger. That's what starts the hype. So, the Human Genome Project started a lot of hype. 3D printing started a lot of hype. Cloud computing. The list goes on. I'm sure you can come up with some of your own. I love video games, so whenever there's a new console, a new cycle of consoles like the PlayStation 4, that's a technology trigger creating hype. Twitter itself, really interesting new platform, a lot of hype around there. New technologies are developed inevitably in an innovative economy. We all want this in general. They're pretty cool. They create some great solutions, often some superior solutions because they exist, and so they just happen. And that's what sets off the hype cycle. So phase 1, technology trigger. Which takes us to phase 2. This one Gartner calls the peak of inflated expectations. Phase 2. So this is when all that dreaming about what the Human Genome Project could do, or what 3D printing can do, whatever the technology trigger is, as we all dream together, maybe that it was on the cover of Time magazine, or you heard your friends talking about that new technology stock that they bought. Whatever it is, all of that dreaming that builds upon itself inevitably becomes not just dreaming, but expecting. After all, we've seen in our own lifetimes how many early emergent technologies have become an amazing gain. I just think of Skype versus payphones. In the generation I've been alive, how I called my parents from college and how my kids call me, and it's a darn sight better today. In fact, speaking of sight, you can actually see your college student, even if they're halfway across the world, for free as often as you want today. So we've seen so many technologies come along and improve our lives that it's natural that you start to expect something great from that new technology. So the problem is, of course, that technologies usually are not nearly ready to deliver those expectations that were born of dreams, and hence, phase 2, the peak of inflated expectations. And this is, in fact, the peak of the hype cycle. In fact, ironically, the visibility for this technology, whichever one it is we're talking about, will never be greater than at this very stage. We're going to go on to talk about the next 3 stages and how good technologies do become adopted, but ironically, there will never be more buzz about that thing than right at this stage. In some ways, it's funny because I think back to my own company, The Motley Fool, and I don't think we ever got more publicity than in our 4th or 5th year when my brother and I were on the cover of Fortune magazine. We were regularly on all kinds of talk shows. Part of it is we were writing books back then, but that's when I was on the Today Show and Charlie Rose and Good Morning America. And everything we do at The Motley Fool today is bigger and more successful than back then. But we probably never had more visibility and may never again because of the hype cycle, because of the peak of inflated expectations. What people thought the internet could do back then, The Motley Fool anyway, was a big fish in a very small bowl at the time. But this isn't just true of my company 15 years ago. This is true of all technologies. The peak of inflated expectations hits, which naturally then takes us to number 3. And the third stage, again, Gartner's terms, I like them all. The third stage, the trough of disillusionment. Booms often go bust at some point, and especially for things that stay in the game over the course of time, let's take Amazon.com stock. That stock has boomed and busted multiple times over a couple decades, but booms, especially when we're talking about inflated expectations, go to bust, and that's what happens in the trough of disillusionment. So that technology's immediate impact, we start to realize, was clearly overstated. And so there's a collective turn against it. Headlines, media, consumers. In fact, a tremendous amount of cynicism is usually born during this period. We're looking backwards, thinking about all that hope, all that hype, sometimes just a year ago, seems now ridiculous, maybe even embarrassing to think what we thought at one point, one recent point, in almost a form of self-horror, one recent point we all thought would actually happen. Did we really think personalized medicine was going to happen shortly after the Human Genome Project? Did we really think that 3D printing would instantly create everything from airplanes right through to medical solutions? And the answer is, we did. And as we're going to cover the next 2 stages, you're going to see that these things are for real in some ways, but this is the trough of disillusionment that we're talking about, and that is, of course, phase 3. Oh, one more thing to say about that. You know how I just said that at the peak of inflated expectations, whatever the technology is will never have more hype and awareness than right at that moment? Well, conversely, right here in the trough of disillusionment, it is from this point that we're actually all up from here. Because the world will never be more disillusioned, more cynical, and more clearly thinking that it was wrong about this technology than right at this point. Number 4. Number 4 is the slope of enlightenment. So during this phase, you've now gotten to the point where this technology is actually being used, has actually been deployed, and now we're able to see as consumers or technologists, as business people ourselves, we're actually able to see the actual ways that this technology is being adapted, will be manifest for all of us and for our society. And really at the heart of the slope of enlightenment is the word acceptance. Acceptance ensues. After all, if it was really a substantial, world-beating, earth-breaking technology back there in phase 1, probably it is going to have some meaning, right? While people's expectations go way up and way down, presumably we're talking about, in the case I talked about earlier, console cycles, or I talked about 3D printing or the human genome, cloud computing. These things are actually really important and real, and it's during phase 4 that we're all a little bit enlightened. We come out of the trough and we realize, yes, this is for real. It is now being used. And let's keep moving here. By the way, right after I do this, I'm going to go back over each of these briefly and give some examples of things, of where I think a few things on our minds are today. And then I'm going to close with a few reflections overall about this framework from Gartner. All right, number 5. Number 5 is the plateau of productivity, and this is the end of the hype cycle. This is where we become smart implementers and practitioners of this technology. So we're now standing on the plateau of productivity. It's a plateau. We can see a long way ahead of us. we can see a long way back. And looking back, we're able to see, yeah, it really was hyped when you think about it. I mean, people did expect too much of it back in the day, and all those magazine covers and conferences and big stories about it were, in fact, way too early in some cases, or in some cases, unrealistic. However, we can now also look around us and say, wow, how relevant it is, how visible it is in our society today, whatever that technology is. And somewhat ironically, I just said how relevant and how visible, but one other aspect of the plateau of productivity is that, ironically, it's nearly invisible in some ways. In other words, it's become well practiced enough and well implemented enough that we kind of take it for granted at this point. And that's the long plateau that continues, by the way, to close this little song and dance until probably that technology gets itself disrupted or maybe loses relevance, like the horse and buggy, or just continues on forever because maybe like e-commerce, it doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon. So that was a short summary. Well, not that short. It took about 10 minutes or so, but that's a short summary of Gartner's hype cycle.
As always, people on this program may have interest in the stocks they talk about, and The Motley Fool may have formal recommendations for or against, so don't buy or sell stocks based solely on what you hear. Learn more about rule breaker investing at rbi.fool.com.